Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the rise of the Akkadians in our continuing study of the history of civilization. In looking at the Mesopotamians, we talked about the Ubaid period, that period where you have an agrarian society, farms and stone tools and knives and bricks and pottery, but no real unification. And then you move to the Uric period, where now I begin to have government organization in cities. They're trading throughout Mesopotamia. Copper is being utilized. We move from there to the early dynastic period, where cuneiform and it doesn't develop overnight, starts off with pictures, and then this develops into syllabic writing, where each little picture represents not the thing that it pictures, but it represents a sound syllable. But I need many hundreds of syllables. It's not like an alphabet. I need many hundreds of syllables in order to write. This is the age of Gilgamesh. These are the age of kings, and we begin to have king lists in different cities. And next we come to the Akkadian Empire. That's where we're going to be in this presentation, with the rise of the city of Akkad. And I'm going to have Semitic kings that come down and rule over Sumer. And so we're going to get to know the beginning of the Akkadian Empire. That's going to be a man by the name of Sargon. So the Akkadians, they're actually coming from the north in central, we're going to almost call it northern Mesopotamia, but really central Mesopotamia. And the Sumerians, they're in the south. And now some other people groups we're going to see eventually will be the Elamites, there to the east, but still short of the Zagros mountains. And then to the north in the Zagros, we're going to see the Medes, and we'll also get to know the Guti, who are probably related to them a bit, the Gutians. Now we have a date for the death of Sargon of around 2330 BC. That's an approximate, and I'm painting with a very broad brush, so give me some latitude. There's an early date and a late date and a middle date, and scholars are unsure which to take that. But the story of Sargon, there's a birth legend around his birth, where his mother was a high priestess. And of course high priestesses weren't supposed to have children, and yet here she's pregnant with a child and gives birth to him. And so she sets him adrift in a basket on the river. Well, that sounds like a bit like the story of Moses, who's, remember, placed in a basket on the Nile River. Well, this isn't the Nile River, this is the Euphrates. He's set adrift in a basket and found by Aki, the drawer of water. He's out there taking water, presumably to take it and put it in either vessels or for irrigation. And he finds this little baby in a basket. And he takes the baby and raises him as his own. So he's raised by Aki. And somewhere along, one story has it that he becomes a gardener. But eventually he's going to rise up in the service of the king. Now, his name is interesting because Sargon means legitimate prince. The Sar is the word for prince, and Sargon, the legitimate one, the legitimate prince. And when you name yourself that, you're probably protesting a bit too much. In other words, you're calling yourself legitimate prince, and if you're anything, that's not what it is. And so he's not a legitimate prince. He was the adopted son of Aki, and yet the story of how he rises to become king is a fascinating one. He becomes the cupbearer to Ur-Zababa of Kish, and he's rising in prominence, he's rising in power to the point that maybe Ur-Zababa is seeing the handwriting on the wall and seeing, I need to do something about this up-and-coming young fellow who's eventually going to be called Sargon. He doesn't have that name yet, I don't think. And so Ur-Zababa gives him a message to send to another king. And that cuneiform tablet is placed inside an envelope. They would actually have clay envelopes. You see a picture of a tablet with an envelope next to it. And Sargon is supposed to take this and deliver it to this other king, this neighboring king. And the message says, kill the person who's got this message. Put him to death. So Sargon doesn't know it, but he's being set up to be murdered. And the story goes that And unknown to Ur-Zababa, Sargon could read. Even though he's the son of the water drawer, or adopted son of the water drawer, he can read. And he opens the envelope and he reads it, and he realizes that the king has turned against him. And so he goes and causes, maybe assassinates, but in some way or another, he overthrows and defeats and kills the king and takes his place. Which somebody, commented and saying, well, that's one of the lessons you get that is that it's good to learn to read. And another one laughingly said, and maybe that's the value of reading someone else's mail. But now he begins this Akkadian Empire. You see, he's Akkadian. He's from lands to the north. He's Semitic. He's not Sumerian. And he's going to found a city of Akkad, which we have not found. We've lost the city. We're not sure exactly where it's located. But he's going to found the Akkadian Empire. So the city of Akkad will be the new capital of that empire. And yet they're going to adapt the Sumerian cuneiform and utilize that as part of their written language. Now, from Sargon, we get his two sons, Ramush and Manishtu. I'm not going to speak about them, but I want to speak about his grandson, Naram-Sin. The victory stela of Naram-Sin dates to the 2200s, so very old, dates to the contemporary time of when he lived. It celebrates his victory over the mountain peoples in the Zagros Mountains, and you can actually see the mountain on the right side of the seal. Normally, remember when you are in Mesopotamia, there's no mountains around. It's all flat. And so he's invading into the mountains, fighting against mountain people who have threatened his reign. And the stela was actually found at Susa, where it had been relocated. An Elamite inscription had been added 1,000 years later, to say, as if to say, well, look, we finally got back at you. It was our turn now. But it originally commemorates his victory. Now, I'm going to give you a blow-up of notice that you have the king, and you've got those he's conquered with spears sticking out of him, and then his soldiers are following behind him. So he's leading them in the battle. But notice the king himself is wearing a helmet with horns on it. That's a symbol of deity. And what he is saying about himself by wearing that helmet with the horns, he's saying, I'm one of the gods. So he takes a title for himself, God of Akkad. He also calls himself King of the Four Corners of the Earth and King of the Universe. Those are all God titles, and he's taking those for himself. He's declaring himself to be one of the gods. What does Naram-Sin mean when he calls himself God of the world? From this map, and this map dates much later to around 500, between 500 and 600 BC, found in the British Museum. It's a Mesopotamian map, one of the earliest maps that we have of the ancient world. That is a map showing how they viewed their world. And notice on the map, when I say map, it's a tablet, but there's a circle, and then there's two lines, parallel lines going from the top to the bottom of our circle. That's depicting the two rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris River. So it's a very, very rough, very crude map, but it's their conception of what the world was like. And then notice beyond that, there's sort of a boundary, and there's mountains here and there's mountains there, those triangular-looking affairs. And that's their conception of the world. So when he speaks about being king of the world, it was the world such as he knew. Now, we've talked about the Uric period, the early dynastic period, and now the Akkadian Empire with Sargon and then his son and grandsons, and it only lasts about 5 kings in that dynasty, and then it's brought to a close by an invasion of a mountain people, the people known as the Guti, and mountain peoples from the Zagros. They invade, they destroy they destroy the city of Akkad, and they conquer all of Mesopotamia. And they are the big power now for the next couple of 100 years. But from that will rise. From that will rise Ur-3, and we'll look at that next time.